Let us now listen to this week's reading from the book Affirmations for Self-Healing. And this is week 3 of 2026. And the topic today is happiness. Happiness is an attitude of mind, born of the single determination to be happy under all outward circumstances. Happiness lies not in things, nor in outward attainments. It is the gold of our inner nature, buried beneath the mud of outward sense cravings. When you know that nothing outside you can affect you, no disappointment, no failure, no misunderstanding from others, then you will know that you have found true happiness. Resolve strongly to keep this flame burning ever in your heart. Now let's repeat today's affirmation. First, we'll start loudly. I vow from today onwards to be happy under every circumstance. I came from God's joy. I am joy. And again, I vow from today onwards to be happy under every circumstance. I came from God's joy. I am joy. Now in a normal voice, I vow from today onwards to be happy under every circumstance. I came from God's joy. I am joy. And now let's whisper. I vow from today onwards to be happy under every circumstance. I came from God's joy. I am God's joy. I am joy. Now mentally, putting our attention at the point between the eyebrows, affirm deeply. I vow from today onwards to be happy under every circumstance. I came from God's joy. I am joy. And our prayer, O Lord of joy, fill me with boundless happiness, for I am thy child, made in thy blissful image. As thou art joy, so also in my inner self am I. Now we'll have today's reading.
This week's reading from the book Rays of the One Light is God present even there where there is ignorance? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. The Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, makes a reference to the divine light that is obscure to the rational faculty, but that enlightens our higher nature. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The reason recoils from this statement with innumerable questions. What is this darkness? Is it conscious that it should comprehend anything? What sort of light would be capable of shining in darkness without transforming at least that part of the darkness in which it shines into light? Does this light shine only at night? And if so, why not? Why only then? The solution is that to divine sight, even daylight seems darkness. The sun itself, like the moon, which shines only by reflected light from the sun, is but a kind of reflection of the cosmic light, which, being immaterial, is invisible to the eyes, but which is the great source of all material reality. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramhansa Yogananda describes his youthful visit to Ram Gopal Mazumdar, the sleepless saint, who lived in the vision of that hidden light. Around midnight, Yogananda wrote, Ram Gopal fell into silence, and I lay down on my blankets. Closing my eyes, I saw flashes of lightning. The vast space within me was a chamber of molten light. I opened my eyes and observed the same dazzling radiance. The room became a part of the infinite vault, which I beheld with interior vision. Why don't you go to sleep? Sir, how can I sleep in the presence of lightning blazing, whether my eyes are shut or open? You are blessed to have this experience. The spiritual radiations are not easily seen. The saint added a few words of affection. This is the light that shineth in darkness. It has been described variously in the great scriptures. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 11th chapter, the devotee Arjuna is given an experience of the infinite state and exclaims in awe, if there should be rise suddenly within the skies, sunburst of 1,000 suns, flooding earth with beams undimmed off, then might be that Holy One's majesty and radiance dreamed of. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om.
Isn't that marvelous? I mean, that's such an exalted. We read that, whether that story in very colloquial terms or common terms, it's a story, or we read out of the Gita. I mean, it's just, we read that and we can't help but think, I want to see that light. I mean, I want to experience that for myself. And I think by reading the autobiography, we realize, and the way Master put it, that it's there, but we can't see it. And that's somewhat frustrating because all the scriptures say that it's right there, but where is it? Why don't we aren't able to see it? And I think in the deeper sense, and this is of course what Swamiji has taught us. He says, Saint John, who was writing that, the light shining in the darkness, but the darkness comprehended it not. He was saying that in our unenlightened state of spiritual delusion in which we're living in this world of Maya, in this state, it's not possible to perceive or comprehend that divine light. It's there, but we can't see it. It's not comprehensible to us. We don't have the capacity, or perhaps it's being blocked. And we must rise above that ordinary human level of consciousness and learn to live in that level in ourselves where God's light ever shines. And of course, this is the message, I think, and we're being exhorted to do the effort, do that which is necessary to be able to have that experience. But just thinking about that experience, it's so exalted that it just calls us to think of that. But why can't I see it? But if you think of the spectrum, light, as a physical reality, we can only see certain wavelengths. There's on the other one end of the spectrum, there's infinite, or there's infrared, then there's ultraviolet on the other end, and we don't perceive those, although there's certain animals that can see those. And it's the same thing you could say with sound. We can hear certain sounds, but just a fraction of the potential dogs and animals that can hear, sounds that are inaudible to us. And this ability it's not that they're not there, but they're hidden from us. We don't have the capacity. And with regards to light, the way out of this darkness, and the scriptures all say this, and the teachings say this, that we learn is the out of this darkness to learn to commune with God's light. This is the spiritual path. We look up into the darkness of the spiritual eye. Come out of the darkness, Mother. Come out, bathe me in thy light. And we call and we call and we call. And I remember there was a story, Rajarsi Yogananda went through a very difficult period of time when he saw no light. And he was a very advanced soul. He saw no light. This went on for a long time, and it was just excruciating for him because he had seen that light. It was part of his reality, but it was taken away from him. And then one day he said, in the far distance, looking into the darkness of closed eyes, he saw a little tiny spark of light, and he began to concentrate. It was something. And on that little spark of light, he began to concentrate. It became brighter and brighter and closer, till ultimately it engulfed his whole consciousness, and he was in bliss. He went into bliss. It was a test for him, but I think it's a test for all of us. So if you do look into that darkness, try to see that little tiny spark, and whatever it is you see, grab onto it and concentrate on it and make it grow like it did for or allow it, you might say, to grow as it did for Rajasi. But if we're speaking here, it's just like St. John was talking about darkness as you could say it's not just the absence of light, but it had a reality, you could say, of its own. And what is that darkness? I mean, we're all of us, it's commonly referenced. It's ignorance, really. And I think as we see darkness manifested in life, not just as the absence of light, yes, you could say it's that, but it's not just that. It's darkness. Then people live in a certain darkness of consciousness, and you see this all the time, and it can be it's disappointing, it's frustrating. You look around and you see ignorance, which is in a sense just the absence of that light in their own consciousness. And at first it's difficult to watch people acting in that way, but in time you realize with a certain sense of compassion, it's just that they don't know anything better. It's like Jesus when he was on the cross, he says, God, forgive them. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They're acting as they think is right or as they've been guided to do. But it's a low state of consciousness. And I think most people, come to realize if we study people, most people simply act out of some conscious desires and sensory impulses. They're not acting from a high state. And with this in mind, with this thought in mind, I was thinking about this, or just a little aside. You could say when a person, any of us who do these satsangs on Sunday, we have this reading every day, every week. There's a reading, and it's a challenge because we're taught, we're instructed, we're advised to speak to the topic, but sometimes the topic's not very what we want to speak about. And I have to admit that this was the case for me. I want to speak about something else, but then there's always the challenge and I hope those of you who do Sunday service take this challenge up. Speak to the topic, but also speak to what you want to speak about, but find a way to connect the two. And that's what I'm doing today, is what I really want to talk about. And I realized it's ignorance, yes, our own ignorance within ourselves. And how can we overcome that? What's the step for us to take? And I was thinking about this because at the beginning of the year, it's somewhat traditional and it comes naturally. We want to speak. The old year is past. Now we have a new year ahead of us. And it's a time for renewal. It's a time, and I believe, that I'm given a few classes along this line of thinking, and I think next Saturday, the online, I'm going to join with Bharat and Shamini on the online. We're going to speak about this subject I want to speak about a little bit further in depth. So if it interests you, join us on Saturday. But what I wanted to speak about is at the beginning of every year in my life, in my spiritual life, it's that time when I go back to the basics. This past week, I was spending a week in seclusion. It's a good time. You assess what happened this previous year? What do I want to do? How do I want to go forward in the coming year? And when in this time of retreating a little bit so that we can look within, analyze, and then come forward is at this time of year, you could say the vibration or the bhav of this moment in time each year lends itself to that. And it's been always my tradition and my practice is to go back to the basics of the spiritual path and start again from the basics. Now, sometimes that might mean just going back. I go back to Hong Sa technique, to I go back to the energization technique, those things that we started out with, and all of us we tend to then take them somewhat for granted, which is not to our benefit to do that. But also with that, I came back in my mind, and I wanted to speak about this today, a basic principle of the spiritual path. And I think for me, it's been the foundation of everything that's followed is this one phrase of Master's. He said, environment is stronger than willpower. In other words, from that statement, I think then we build that if we know that and imbibe that, take that within ourselves, we learn to choose our environment, choose that environment wisely, and choose those things that influence us. Now, I think one of the marks of a person who's gained a little bit of wisdom on the spiritual path is to realize what you think, how you think, what you like, what you dislike. Much of what you believe has all been influenced by the environment in which you've been brought up. Not 100%, because we do have a little bit of free will in there. We have karma, but much of it has been influenced by the environment that you live in. And you think that, oh, I believe this. I wear these sorts of clothing. I do this. I belong to this political persuasion. I belong to this tradition. You think that you've chosen those things, and to some degree you have. But basically, you have been influenced to think a certain way. You take two children who are twins. You bring them up separately in separate environments. Now, they do have certain things in common, tendencies that you see manifested. How they express themselves in many ways can be similar, but they can be brought up on they'll come to believe total different things on the spectrum of possibilities, often brought up in different environments. And we're influenced. And the mark of a wise person, a mark of a wise disciple, somebody who's come to realize, and even those of us who have been doing this for many decades never get to the place where you think, oh, I've been doing this so long that I'm immune to influences. That's the first step of getting into deep, deep trouble. I think those of us who have been meditating for a long time know that we're all subject to influence, and that's, you could say, to think that way, that, oh, I'm not, that's the beginning of a very slippery slope. If anything, as time goes by, as we meditate, should become more humble, more careful, because we realize the power of influence. Not to become afraid of it, because it's not something we should be afraid of, but just to know the power of what we're up against. And I think, if anything, what it's done for me is it made me hold tight to Guru. and to hold tight to my spiritual path, because I realize we can be influenced in a negative way. And I go back just to the beginning, and this is one of the very first lessons I learned when I came onto this spiritual path. I read the autobiography of a yogi. I wanted to learn to meditate. I thought, okay, I want to learn Kriya Yoga. I met Swami Kriyananda. I asked him, what do I do? He said, take up a spiritual practice and learn to meditate, one of the first things. And I said I would do that. And I went home. I couldn't meditate. I couldn't last 5 minutes. I was so restless. And then an interesting thing happened. I began to go to Swami's house, his flat. He lived in San Francisco at that time. And I began once a week on Thursday evenings. I would go to his house where we would have a small satsang there, and we would meditate. He'd usually meditate about a half an hour. And I couldn't meditate 5 minutes, but I'd go there. I could sit there calmly for a half an hour. It was so amazing to me. Then I'd go home, nothing. And it was back again. And I realized out of that, I said, was guided, you might say. Grace I learned the lesson very quickly, and that's what ended up impelling me, to go say, I've got to go somewhere where I can be in this sort of environments more constantly if I want to learn to meditate, which I did. Fortunately, opportunities opened for me to be able to do that. But just that lesson, basic lesson, put myself in that environment. And then as a little bit of time goes by, I thought, hey, I'm good, because I was in a good environment. But as soon as you took me out of that environment, everything started to fall apart again. And so learning this lesson and is basically the key element. And I think it's, in taking it beyond just meditation, learning to behave, as Master said, learning to act in a proper way, learning to ultimately take up Kriya and be able to have any positive effects of that. Some people are very good. They can just find a calm space and be able to do this. But it's been my experience. And it sounds passive, of course. It's, you don't have any willpower, you don't have any self-control. Well, I've gained a little bit, but if I look back in those days, no, I didn't have much. And for me, I think it's been 9/10 of the battle, 90% of the battle, 80, 90% of the battle is learning first, realizing that I am able to be influenced. I am influenced. And how then the next step is, well, if I'm influenced, I can learn to choose my influences. I can learn to put myself into situations that will positively help me, to use them to my advantage. And I think this, if we can learn this, I think we can actually learn what are those influences I want to be what are those environmental forces putting myself in that will allow me to do what it is that I want to do, allow me to meditate better, allow me to open myself to God and gurus. How do I learn to do that? And that basic, simple principle is basically, I think, for everybody starting on the spiritual path and ultimately continuing, but particularly at the start, learn, acknowledge your influences, because we are influenced by our whims and fancies. That's a fact. And you think, oh, there's this principle, and I'm high-minded, and I'm doing it because of high virtues and what all. No, you're influenced by whims and fancies. And when we learn that, what are those whims and fancies? Then you open yourself to the ability to say, well, I want to be influenced by something better than that. And we learn to discriminate. And you can't make deep progress unless you can discriminate between what's going to be good for you and what's going to take you in a different direction. And then that ability to discriminate is supplemented by an ability to make a choice. I can choose. Now, you can choose. There's that whole story I often tell about learning to choose happiness and then admitting afterwards, I don't always choose happiness. I don't always choose it. And that's a whole other lesson that we have to learn. We can recognize this is going to be in my good. If I do this, this is going to be better for me. But we don't do it always, do we? And we have to learn. And eventually, of course, we do learn. We learn to choose wisely because then it's oftentimes because we end up having to suffer for that. And we make the wrong choice often enough. And then finally, we learn the lesson. Now, there's in the Bhagavad Gita, there's this section in there, those slokas that Krishna is talking, and he's talking about how he uses the image of, it only takes a little puff of effort to blow the dust off of a mirror to have a real clean reflection. And he says, but sometimes it's on there a little bit more tightly, and it's like rust on the mirror. He says, for that, you've got to scrub it a little bit. And then to get it to be able to shine. And sometimes there's not much you can do. You just have to let time pass and then things will get better. Well, he's really speaking about sattva, rajas, and tamas. In that, for a sattvic person, just a little puff of effort and you have pure reflection. For the rajasic person, you got to work at it a little bit. You got to put effort. You got to really engage yourself in that. And then for those with tamasic tendencies, it's like an embryo, as Gita says. The embryo has to grow. The child grows in the mother, and it's only after 9 months. Time has to go by, and then ultimately the child manifests and is born. And that's tamas. Sometimes with tamas, there's nothing you can do but learn to work at it. And I think none of us are totally sattvic, totally rajasic, totally tamasic. All of us have these three tendencies. And in each quality, there's the higher expression and the lower expression. And if we introspect, and this is a good time of year, every year, and if you take seclusion, but always, it's a regular practice, introspect and look at the various qualities you have. How are they manifesting? And all of us have tamasic qualities, or every quality, that's not the right way to say it. Every quality we have has a tamasic and a sattvic expression. It's all gradation, it's directional. And we look at ourselves and we begin to see that, yes, I can see these things. I don't beat myself up with it if I have a tamasic tendency, but it's going to take time. And what you have to do is in that time is put yourself, the only way is in this Krishna, or maybe it was Master saying this, Master was saying, well, if you have tamasic tendencies of any sort, there's not much you can do about it. In other words, you don't have control over it. You're like the baby in the embryo in the mother's womb. You can't control much. But what you can do is, in terms of when we have tendencies, is one of the simplest things we can do, and the most the most valuable, is to put ourselves in an environment that changes us and rubs off on us. We can at least do that, and particularly for those tendencies that are so deep within ourselves, no matter how much we're going to scrub on them or blow on them, they're not going to go away. But we can do something, and that's choose our environment, put ourselves in that environment. When we learn our limitations and our strengths, learn your limit, be cognizant of them. Be cognizant, and we learn what not to allow, whims and fancies, and what to allow, positive advice, positive direction, and put ourselves, this is the mark of wisdom, somebody who can be able to identify and act on it, to be able to actually put something in motion. And this is really what, as I said, it's this darkness that this reading today is speaking about. It's ignorance. And ignorance, there's a saying, you don't know what you don't know. You think you know everything, but you just don't, you're not cognizant of what you don't know. And a big problem with ignorance in spirituality, darkness in spirituality, is the ignorant person really doesn't know. He or she might suspect it, but he doesn't really know that he's ignorant. That might think everything's fine, may even think he's wise, but the wise person knows he's ignorant and proceeds carefully and does something about it. Ignorance, it has a tendency to be directional, and it's the problem with ignorance also is it's self-fulfilling, it's self-reinforcing. So that means like an ignorant person tends to, how some people, they're wrong, they're wrong. You're debating somebody, you're talking, this person's absolutely wrong. But how some people when they know they're wrong, but they double down on it and they become even more, and you can't debate with them or you can't even convince them, because the more you try to shake them from their ignorance, the more they hang on to it. And this is the tendency. Ignorance itself has magnetism. It tends to reject those things that allows it to be able to rise up and overcome it. And we close, in other words, ignorance tends to cause us to close in ourselves. And the result of that is, unfortunately, we close ourselves off to those things that can help us, and we close ourselves off to God's grace. And so we don't want that. We need to, and the best way, I think, if we have certain tendencies of the darkness, choose an environment that's going to rub off on you. Sometimes you just have to say, this tendency, I just can't overcome it. It's just, I've tried and tried and tried, and your will isn't strong enough. That's when you need to put yourself particularly in a good environment that allows it to influence you in a positive way. And another problem with ignorance is it tends to give rise, and they go together. Ignorance tends to give rise to indifference. And this indifference is the enemy, the big enemy of the devotee. You get to the point, perhaps through discouragement or your lackluster devotion, you have no devotion, it's gone. And you come to a point where you're just saying, and something is saying in yourself, I'm just not interested. Not only do you reject something, you're not struggling with it anymore. Like sometimes you have a negative tendency and you're struggling with it, but then you just kind of give up, say, I'm not even going to try. I'm not interested. And it's like you talking to a stone wall, trying to encourage somebody, I'm not interested. And there's not much you can do. And indifference, and this is the insidious thing about indifference, darkness itself, ignorance and darkness, indifference, they have a certain magnetism to them. There's a tendency within all of us, of which we must be careful, to withdraw from life. You become discouraged. You withdraw, you're indifferent, and this has a certain psychological attraction. It's a dark, it's like ignorance and evil has its own magnetism. And it's kind of, as Swami used to talk, he had this wonderful French phrase, which I can't remember French, but it was the attraction for the mud. And he used to express that, into the mud we want to go. And the unconsciousness itself is pulling us. And so, I don't want to face it. I don't want no more challenges. I don't want to rise up. I got to get up in the morning, and all of this psychologically. Strange it may seem, there's a certain attraction, this in that fellow in the autobiography, sleep to samadhi. Yeah, and he just wanted to sleep. And this is something that has particularly if you have any of those tendencies, those are particularly where you have to put yourself in an environment that is the opposite of that to get yourself moving. You may, if you're tamasic in any area of your life, put yourself in a rajasic environment. Sometimes people say, well, I feel tamasic about this, I'm going to put myself in a sattvic environment. Well, unfortunately, sattva and tamas are not all, in some ways, outwardly expressed, very similar sometimes. A very calm person sitting in deep meditation may very close to look like a tamasic person. Oh, that guy's just lazy. I'm just going to sit there. And of course, it's not laziness if you're sattvic. But if you're tamasic, you become very lazy. The best thing to do is if you have tamasic tendencies, what's the rajasic expression of whatever that particular tendency is, and put yourself in that environment. And you'll find that then you rise up, you get rajasic, and then ultimately, of course, you can purify that. But the essence here of what we're saying is at the beginning of the year, do some self-analysis. Every year, we're spiraling. It's not a straight line to God. It's a spiral. We come back again and again and again to some basic principles. And as I said, one of the most basic principles is environment is stronger than willpower. And look at those things. Where do you need willpower? Where in your life could you use that? Your sadhana, your outward expression, what you do, your job, whatever it might be. And if you're struggling with something that requires willpower, environment is influencing you, and you can choose that. You can change it. How do you change it? Well, that's up to you. You have to explore that. So this is the time of year. Think of this, take this, and renew your spiritual life. This is a time for renewal, inner renewal, outward renewal, summoning up energy for the year to come. And then we look back toward the end of the year. How did they, Arjuna, or Sanjay, how did they on the battlefield? And then, go forth and refine it again and again and again. And this, if a person who does this within this basic principle is wisdom. This we never raise until that day of freedom comes. We've overcome all these tendencies, these whims and fancies. Then we can look back and say, and rest, you might say. But until that day, till we reach that state, that jivan mukta, till you can go breathless and go into samadhi and stay there, you're not safe. It's only when we reach that state, nirvikalpa samadhi, that we're really safe. Otherwise, we have to be on our guard. And this is the basic foundation of our guard, is our environment. So not just physical, I'm speaking mental, emotional, all that goes with it, that which is going on in our life. Choose wisely, and that's the way of the masters. And in choosing wisely, remember, we choose, but God is there waiting for us to choose wisely. If you take one step toward me, God, or toward God, God takes 10 steps toward you. We're not in this alone. But God is, Guru and God want to see what direction you want to go. You go in a positive direction, grace comes to help you. Let's take that into the coming year, the coming weeks, coming month. How about today and tomorrow?